institution or such a gigantic lectern, so. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. I'll do my best to be clear about what we'll talk about, and hopefully it'll be interesting for you. I'm really into maps, so this map we'll discuss a little bit later. There's an enterprising geophysicist named Sophia Vergara, I believe her name is pronounced, and she shared her JavaScript, which you can run in Google's Earth engine, not Google Earth or Google Maps. Google has an online application you can apply to gain access to that accesses satellite imagery. And using her script, you can do a heat map of a land surface. All you do is define the coordinates and year, and it will try to do the map for you. And I did this heat island map in the city of Auburn to help us strategize how to move forward with our forestry efforts in the city of Auburn.
It may not be turned on.
Turn on.
There you go.
So, Director Brown mentioned that Cynthia and I are working on a project for our, you'd think we were doing this for our retirement, but when we first got married, we met through the United States Peace Corps, and the first thing we found we had in common was a desire to live off-grid somewhere. So it took us an awful long time, but we finally found a piece of property, and we own 20 acres up here near the Cayuga Nature Center. And this is an interesting property because several decades ago, the power utility from Rochester, at the time it was Rochester Gas and Electric, hired a corporation, and they went out in a very stealthy way and they bought up about 3,500 acres of what were then large farms, but nowadays we would call them small farms, about 30 farms, and they were going to build a nuclear power plant. However, the week they announced their construction plans was the same week when there was an accident at a nuclear power station down in Pennsylvania. So this is what they dreamed that landscape would be. And I don't know if you know this, but at one time we thought we'd have a nuclear power station every 10 miles on the south shore of Lake Ontario. As it is, we're only dealing on this little square here of this 20 acres parcel. And there's only, I don't know, 3 stations nearby. And our goal is to understand this landscape and try to figure out where it is in a natural stage of succession. We've encountered a number of delays, not only because it costs money to build, and it takes quite a bit of shared understanding to develop, but we've been managing quite a few invasive plants. But we've got the roof on our barn now, so this photo's a little out of date, and we now have a set of stairs. And we've been doing this all on our own. We're building on a pocket. She and I attended home building courses more than 30 years ago together, and we decided on a timber framing approach, and then we would like to do the rest of the construction with things like straw bale and mud, and stone, really advanced tech like that. In terms of wood utilization, I am personally really into found wood. So we keep bees, and we keep bees in hollow logs. We started out with what are called top bar hives, and top bar hives were derived from an approach that they've been using in East Africa. And typically they're called canyon top bar hives. But the bees are having a tough time in our climate, as you know. They're very sensitive to a number of diseases and parasites, and in particular the neonicotinoid insecticides are intensely sensitive to that. So we're really jazzed about using hollow log technology. So there are wonderful, beautiful things that the forest and the trees on the planet give us, right? We know this. However, there's aspects to the talk, and when Director Brown asked me to come, I thought I would try to discuss what we're doing at Auburn in the face of what we're experiencing this summer. I don't want to come off as an alarmist. I do not believe that humans face extinction from climate change, but I think there are probably going to be 1 billion to 1.5 billion people on this planet whose lives are going to be unsustainable. They're going to be without help. They're going to live in abject misery. Only 30 years ago, we would count the destitute and the landless and the food insecure at about 900 million to 1 billion people. That number dropped considerably with the expansion of the global economy, which peaked in 2019. We'll never see that economy again. That's my feeling. And that means that's why foodless, people without food, food insecure people, starvation and famine, those numbers are climbing up again. They're well over 750 million people, and it's going to grow. So my focus on today's talk with respect to climate change has to do with adaptation, not mitigation, because I wish I could tell you that the news on the forests on the planet was better than it is, but I think the news is bad. That's my take. I don't want to freak you out. So if this bums you out so badly, you don't want to be here talking to me, I will not take it personally. I believe there is hope, and that for many, many people, dealing with the redistribution of the side effects of climate change will be manageable for some people. Coastal cities, over the next 50 years, are going to have some very, very difficult choices to make. Obviously, rainfall patterns and heat and all of that, we can get into that. So, there's a fascinating video that's available for you online for free, and it's on PBS. By the way, I'll give a copy of this to Director Brown. She'll have all these references, and you can make use of them. And it's a very recent video about ways in which communities are successfully managing adaptation. And the news on fire with forests is, you'll hear that there's data showing that we're actually burning fewer acres across the planet. And I understand that data, but when you start to look at the impacts this is actually having on ecosystems globally, you begin to see that a part of what a forest does is generate its own rainfall through transpiration. And part of what a forest does is it sequesters carbon and doesn't necessarily lock it up, but it plays a very specialized living role in the carbon budget on the planet. And by degrading the quality of these ecosystems, it degrades their capacity for not only self-renewal, but for the provision of those ecosystem services, which are absolutely essential for maintaining an equilibrium of life on a planet's metabolism that's comfortable for mammals like us. So we know this 2023, we had serious fires in the Pine Barrens. We had fires in Rockland County, New York, not even in the Catskills. The California wildfires are, of course, quite intense. And in Greece. Notice also that right after we had the fires in Greece, we had severe rainfall events. So there's flooding. You had serious, serious wildfires in California, and they're followed by flooding. Yes, there's been fires, part of this natural ecosystem, for a long, long time. Not debating that. The frequency of fires, the damage they're doing, the temperatures at which they burn, signaling to us that our conventional management approaches are no longer sustainable. Fires in Indonesia have been burning for quite some time, and they're getting worse because of the very wet rainforest conditions down there. They are basically peat forests, right? Which means that they grow biomass so rapidly, it builds up in the soil faster than it can decompose, so it slowly decomposes. It really becomes like a peat moss material at depth. And like those spongy wet forests in Canada, when they burn, there's a lot of particulate matter, there's a lot of toxins, a lot of smoke up in the atmosphere, and a lot of carbon is going up with it. And Lahaina, in the island of Maui in Hawaii, has clearly brought our attention onto the human impact. I'm afraid a lot of why this fire occurred is very well understood. There's been fires burning there for quite some time. And residents I speak with who live there and have been displaced and luckily survived these fires point directly, there was no doubt in their mind it had to do with the invasive grasses that were growing there without any, consistent, well-funded, well-thought-out attempt to manage them in a landscape that was transformed not only by colonialism, but then the transformation of the landscape from a wetland-type ecosystem into a ag land for what? Pineapples and sugarcane. My friend Sean, I was most worried about, because I knew he lived the line. And, the guy, how did I even know the guy got out? How do I get in touch? I text him, I do Facebook. He made it out. He made it out like in one of those movies where the heroine, she's like a deep, dark operative. She's not really working for Mossad, but she's CIA. But in her spare time, she's working for the former Eastern Bloc, and she can jump buildings and drive motorcycles. He goes to the house. They just in time, he said, Walt, it came down to this. They saw the 200-foot wall of fire coming down the street, on his street. He said he knew it was either grab my phone and my wallet, or if I go for my backpack, it's my backpack or my life. They go inside, they grab their jazz, they jump in the truck, they're driving down the road, driving down the highway. The fire is filling the rearview mirror. The cars, the propane tanks on either side of them are exploding. Oh, by the way, on their way to the car, the birds are falling from the sky on fire. The insects are falling to it. It sounds apocalyptic. And we've seen the aftermath. Now, of course, it's, whose fault is it? Who's going to sue who? Who's going to buy out who? And this wonderful banyan fig, Ficus bengaliensis, this is an interesting tree. Okay, this has become the symbol for the local community of their own resilience and their refusal to let this determine their future. Sean, my buddy, he's another tree guy. He's like, don't climb up there. But he climbs up there. He said they've got professional arborists on staff who are working with the tree. They've got volunteers and gardeners. They're irrigating, they're fertilizing. They are convinced the tree is still alive, and they are using it as a symbol. They're projecting their hope onto this tree. I didn't know this about this species of ficus, but of all the trees in the world, this tree has the largest canopy for a species of all trees that are flowering trees on the planet. Now, I've worked with figs a lot because when I worked in the Peace Corps, I lived in a valley that was named after a type of strangling fig like this. What they do is they're amazing how they send out roots and vines, and they grow from top to down, they reach out, and they say hello to the tree next to them, and then they grow up to the tree, and then they take over the canopy, and then they become a big tree themselves. So it's now the symbol. Now, Sean sent me this. I believe this is the official logo. Notice how it's got the little padlock symbols on that because they don't want people ripping it off. You can already go on to Etsy and eBay and find folks selling Lahaina Strong t-shirts with a slightly different design. But if you want the proceeds for the t-shirt to reach the people who are living out of cars and living in hotels and sleeping on people's bathroom floors, this is the t-shirt you want to buy. So, I thought of, well, Hawaii, that's kind of got a dry tropical feel. And in Indonesia, I know this is out of date because by now this forest is gone. We can spell the transformation of what's happening to these forest lands, right? Okay, you see the forest, you cut it down, you burn it, and then you grow stuff on it. You grow stuff either to feed yourself or to export. And the teak in this forest was harvested because there was a fantastic market for outdoor lawn furniture. That's what most of the teak on the planet Earth goes for. And logging operations, you can find photos like this. I had photos from Nigeria that were just taken a couple of weeks ago with the same type of logging operations going on in Nigeria. It's all part of the necessity to feed families, whether it's in Peru where you're poaching mahogany and you falsify the permits to transfer the wood. You're stealing black cherry from the Mohawk lands in New York State because black black cherry has still got a pretty good price at the sawmill. You know, maybe it's teak or it's bushmeat trade because you can't find protein where you live in Africa. These are folks who do not necessarily have the same type of choices that we have, and they justifiably can turn the tables on us when we start feeling a little too morally superior. And I want to take a second and think about this cartoon here, because the publication date on this cartoon was 1984, and it's about the time when I bought this book. It was a beautiful atlas of planet management. And here on this axis we have decades, starting here in the 60s, all the way up to 2025, which is around the corner, right? And then on this axis is millions of hectares, and a hectare is about 2.5 times the size of an acre, and that's in billions, billions of hectare. And notice how it's describing a decline in forest land use around the planet, saying that by 2025 we'd have about half of what we started with in the 80s, and unfortunately that's pretty much correct. And the story of what's happening in the tropical forests, Africa, Indonesia, and in South America is they get burned, right? If they don't get burned, they get cut first, and then they get burned. And it literally is a planet on fire. And now we can easily measure where the fires are occurring because satellite imagery is so good, the sensors are so good, the data is pretty good. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, the data was not so good, but it allowed us to take the compiled satellite studies and ground truthing of activists and scientists at the time and try to map out where we were going. So if we thought about where the rainforest, let's say in the tropical parts of South America, the Amazon, right? We could see where it was shrinking, and we could predict where it was going to go. So the orange was already severely degraded. The gray was next. The Mato Grosso area at the time in the early 2000s was being converted into soy. The conversion has occurred. The green patches represent the core of the Amazonian ecosystem as we imagined it should be. Of course, here's the thing about this. Nobody knows how to regrow these resources. This is not management. This is harvesting, but it's kind of like mining. Because there's a big difference between logging as an enterprise and forestry that uses silviculture. At least with silviculture, if you have knowledge of, let's say, how these forest ecosystems work here in the Finger Lakes, you can try to exploit them and steward them into another generation because you know something about the biology of the reproduction of that ecosystem. That's in an ecosystem around here where you got maybe 25 species of mature trees and a bunch of associated shrubs. In some of these tropical ecosystems, you could have 250 species of trees alone per acre, many of which we have no idea how to replicate, reproduce, cultivate, grow sustainably. The scientific and technical knowledge, yes, we have made progress, but the fact remains, we really don't know. So, as we all know, the tropical rainforest, particularly in South America, has been mowed down. That's also been happening in Africa, and it's happened in Southeast Asia and Indonesia as well. And now that same process is underway with the circumpolar forest of the taiga, right? The great coniferous forest that goes from Scotland, northern parts of Scotland in the highlands, all the way over towards Sweden, into the Soviet Union, and then around the pole, all the way over into Alaska and northern Canada. That process is what's underway right now. So if you're in Brazil and you say, oh, well, and believe me, I've had this conversation with my friends from Brazil, okay, and my friends from Indonesia. I said, hey, wait a minute, that's what you guys did, and he's not wrong. They're not wrong. These ladies gentlemen that I'm speaking of, these incredibly smart people who come here for their graduate education, and say, whoa, 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 wait a minute, look what you guys did. So Michael Williams, I got this out of his book from '92, Virgin or Undisturbed Forest, 1620. You know, you can see variations on a map like this, but they all pretty much tell the story. By 1850, you could see what had happened on the eastern seaboard. And by the time you reach the 1850s, all that's left up here, a little bit in the Catskills, here's the Adirondacks, but the great forest here in the Lake States was still intact. Then, this amazing forest all the way down the Appalachian spine, into even everything from the bottomlands to the upland dry pine forests of the southeast, had not yet been touched after the Civil War. And then it was, let's rock. And that's where we were in 1920. We had cut down so many trees. The topic of the day then was timber famine. We felt like we were running out of wood. And really, that's kind of the story from the very beginning with Western civilization, right? We needed this very important material because it was not just cool to have a house, they were strategic natural resources when this country was first founded, right? It was like the oil of the day. I mean, people went to war over trees. It was a big deal. And in our, just like the folks who are cutting down the forests all over the world today, when we started out in this country, it's a resource, we're going to exploit this. And when it's abundant, you can see no end. I mean, the thinking was, how could we ever run out of white pine? We could never run out of this resource. So this is a cool book from 1849 describing the Holland Purchase of Western New York. Basically, once you go from the emancipation, or once you go from here west all the way out to Buffalo, you're dealing with what was then called the Holland Purchase. And so here's your pioneer, right? You got rid of the Native Americans, you come in here, you start setting up shop, you're chopping down trees however you want. You got to get started somehow. Trees are so abundant, you can do whatever you need. In fact, trees are so abundant, you don't even have to dig fence post holes. You just cut down the skinny ones and lay them down in the zigzag pattern. Now you can control where animals move because the material is so abundant, right? You're never going to run out. Well, in 10 years, now we've got a little bit of fancy stuff going on. You got a nice little, a nice little fence here that took some actual lumbering and hammers and nails. You've got the orchard. And in a lifetime, now you have railroads. And the landscape is devoid of trees because now you're dealing with commodity production agriculture. Notice the big pine trees they're sawing, because that's the first thing we wanted, right? When we showed up, the European powers looked at these white pine, and then later when they saw the red spruce in the mountains, they really got excited. And the great log drives in the early parts of the nation were all devoted to loading these timbers onto ships to make the ships that were the projection of the power of the British, and the French, the Dutch, and the Spaniards, and all the great navies of the world. And the British, of course, were the dominant colonial power in the United States. And the Navy took jurisdiction over all these big pine trees. And like the crackers that they made for the sailors, or the cannons they made, or the wooden plates they served the sailors their food on, they all had the broad arrow, which was also marked on the trees. The American colonial governments began to restrict the cutting of white pines because those were reserved for the Royal Navy. The British White Pine Act in 1722 reserved all the white pines for the Royal Navy. Now here are these settlers did not want to hear from the king that they couldn't use their own trees. Because as a matter of fact, the colonialists were selling their trees to the French, and the British were not too thrilled about that. So there was a woodland rebellion, and arguably the source of the real revolutionary fervor for the Revolutionary War. But out of of this comes this idea that trees are a resource of economic replacement value. We begin to think about renewability as an economic thought, not a component of an ecosystem that had to be understood. And that's what we've inherited, an authoritarian model that's based on keeping a market fed without considering the ecological consequences of how you sustain the model. I don't cast this in terms of right and wrong and good and evil, just in terms of the consequences. So there's some things going on right now about that really call into question whether this model is as sustainable as we would wish it to be. It's certainly profitable, and for some of us on the earth, it's working out great. So if you look at the nature-based global emission offsets, we've been offsetting carbon for, I don't know, 20 years now? And it would be like if, let's say I want to build a power plant in your community. And you say, you know, that's cool, Walt, you want a power plant, you need to offset all the carbon you're going to do. So I turn to a country and I say, hey, can I buy some carbon offsets from you? You set aside, say, for every ton of carbon, you'll set aside an acre of forest. And that will offset my production. But look at the market price. Do you see a trend in this market price? Do you think the market has suddenly figured out that maybe the value of the offsets is not what it should have been? Because, as Greta Thunberg said, the offset market doesn't work. Net zero accounting makes us feel so good, but it doesn't work. Some very detailed studies have gone into this, some published in publications as radical as Science, systematically going out and ground truthing if these offsets actually represent real substantial forest properties that are keeping the carbon. And they saw some really interesting accounting games like double counting, so that maybe when I promised you I'd offset with her acreage, my buddy over here is doing a steel plant, he offset his steel production with the same acres you promised I could. Double counting. Fascinating game. Also, the emission of the carbon through the fires is now so high, carbon, and the forests are getting so small, they are no longer a net sequester of carbon. They're a net emitter. And ecologically, this is a huge problem for us. If the offset market doesn't work, if the forests cannot sequester the way we expected they would, because, you know, after all, we wrote these rules, why aren't these forests doing what we told them to do? And they're not, right? That means there are models for how we thought the planet would behave for our comfy lifestyles isn't coming true. Kind of exactly what Greta told us. Oh, what's this? This is the emissions of wildfire smoke this year in Canada, nearly triple what it's been for the previous 2 decades. And this summer, we broke the atmospheric carbon dioxide level again. So not only of July and August, I think some of the warmest months ever recorded on the planet, ever. We're now way over 420. We're heading for way above 424 parts per million atmospheric carbon, when we should be trying to get back to 350. Even organizations as conservative as my own, New York State Arborists, this is our chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, had an article in their online magazine, Trees Moving North from Global Warming. This is dated April 26, 2023. We've seen this happening in our lifetime. We're now introducing plants that are like really comfy in South Carolina. We're going to try them up here at the Finger Lakes. Because we were supposed to be able to hold out until, say, 2040, that we would be like Virginia, here in the Finger Lakes. It's happening faster than we thought. So, what if we said, you know, there's this guy, his name Bill McKibben or something, some kind of environmentalist. He made an observation that the most earth-shattering, important, significant scientific discovery of the 20th century was not the splitting of the atom. It wasn't the discovery of how to do computing with a silicon wafer. It was the discovery of the Aldo Leopold is considered to be the writer and the wildlife preservationist and an ethicist who looked back on his own life and said, you know what, I've made some mistakes. I'm not going to deny them. Let's change. Let's engage this world ethically and morally in terms of ecosystems. So for him, conservation, from an ecological point of view, had to do with humans having fewer choices in the struggle for existence. Not that you have fewer choices because of your gender or your race or your age or your national origin. No, 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 no. Do you want to live? Are we going to have a functional society? Maybe we can't always just do it our own way. And he wanted to help people think about having a harmonious relationship with what he called the land organism, which is the idea of thinking of yourself as part of an ecosystem. And I always say to my students, or my friends who are right-wing climate deniers, who think that ecosystems are an illusion and that biology is made up, I say, well, if you're not part of an ecosystem, show me how you will hold your breath successfully for 5 minutes, and then talk to me about how you are not interacting with your natural environment. So our way of trying to do this in Auburn is with a community-based forestry management approach. Wouldn't it be great if we had a fantastic staff and all the money in the world? Sorry, we're not Central Park. We don't have that kind of money. So we were very fortunate, thanks to my friend Bill and his colleague Onia, who did the grant writing. We secured funding from New York State to pay me to do inventory work and write a management plan for the city of Auburn and their community forest. And the city formally adopted it this February. One of the things that was so cool about the plan is I decided it'd be great if we illustrated the plan, not just with cool tables, you know, and maps and photographs, but with art. So we had a community art project as part of it. That meant that our local partnership between our tree planting group, Grow Auburn's Trees, now was partnering directly with New York State DEC. We worked with 8 artists to illustrate the management plan. And then we had 8 community members help write the management plan, which, as you well know, is hard to get people to read these days when the phones keep drawing our eyeballs away. And when Bobby Panic delivered her poem at an inauguration on January 2022, in her poem she said that the city of Auburn, how lucky are we, surrounded by vineyards, apple orchards, strawberry fields and hops, Colloquium Museum of History and Art, many treasures you impart. However, it's in your backyard where we find the gold, perceptible leaves for us to hold. And she was talking about the great big ginkgo. Now, is it a Townsend ginkgo like you have here in Aurora? I don't know. By the way, I did not take my constitutional walk up to the kicking tree. You know, they kicked me. You know, maybe there's another cool story behind our ginkgo. Arthur Hutchinson did this beautiful art that was at the Colloquium Museum. So, you know, urban forestry in the city, why are we doing it? Well, most Americans live in the city. That's number one. And urban areas in the city, urban areas in the United States take up more land than Rhode Island and New Hampshire combined, and that area is growing. Trees, of course, are beautiful, and one thing you can show empirically is that trees actually add value to your property. Shading keeps you cooler. And as trees transpire, they suck heat out of the air. Am I going on too long? How am I doing?
No, yeah, there's a class that was
All right.
starting.
Just, you know, don't be shy. So we've got to figure out a way to measure this, because we need to know, is it improving? Is it changing? We know the canopy is so important. So the urban tree canopy is defined as the area directly under a tree when viewed from directly above. And it casts kind of a shady area that you can quantify in area. And the average urban urban tree canopy in the US is about 27%. And in Auburn, part of my job was to measure this. We had three principal sources of data I used to measure the tree canopy data over time. I did this in a computer application called the Geographic Information System. I used a somewhat older version of the leading commercial product. It's kind of like a Jeep with four-wheel drive and the doors are off. It has standard transmission. It doesn't have a backup camera. And you have no place to plug in your gizmo to listen to the tunes you like. It barely has AM, FM radio, but I'll tell you what, it's really reliable. And I own it. The better version of that software costs $1,000 a month. I don't have that kind of dough. So we had data from 2005. This was satellite imagery that we could easily translate to measure the area of our trees. Now it turns out that Cuyahoga County, for reasons I cannot explain, are included in the 1 meter data set that was part of this study of the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. And they classified it for you. So it didn't require any classification in the software. And then finally, New York State makes 2018 LiDAR data available for free, if you can figure out how you're going to access the LiDAR data. Because there was a time when you could get the very best LAS tool software for free because the person who ran that company was like really into empowering communities. But the man was severely depressed and bummed out, and he checked out, and his successors now charge you money. But I found available software to allow me to manipulate the LiDAR. What that means is it's low-intensity laser data generated by a gizmo underneath an airplane that flies at fairly low elevation. And we have it for most of New York State. And what we know is, by looking at these different chunks of data over time, is that we had data from 2006, 2013, and 2018, that we were now below 29% canopy cover. Now I had to run a model. I created my own crew model for what it meant that we lost our ash from the emerald ash borer, because we did lose 1,200 trees that we know of on the public spaces. And we had to come up with some way to defensively model what the percentage of canopy we lost on private property where I did not have permission to get actual inventory numbers on. So we're now trending down to about 28%, which is slightly above the national average, but less than Cecil's recommendation of what we call the 330-300 rule. Now, there's a wonderful nonprofit. If you don't know about American Forests, you should. Not only are they a really cool nonprofit, they provide all kinds of really fascinating resources and possibly gainful employment, folks. They used to provide a prescription for communities on what targets they should use for inner city, undeveloped, suburban, countryside neighborhoods. They don't do that anymore because the variability in land use is too great. So this Cecil character, because I'm not even going to try to pronounce this dude's last name, he said, all right, let's try this. Every resident in a municipality should be able to see from their house 3 mature, substantial trees. That's where your number 3 comes from. Every neighborhood should have at least 30% tree canopy cover, no matter what their socioeconomic indicators suggest. Everybody. And everybody should live within 300 meters of a park, so they can go out and enjoy some open space. That's about 1,000 feet. Now, part of what my gig working with the city and the state was to inventory the street and park trees. So that meant I looked at each and every tree. I got waypoints, GPS data, right, and I could identify the tree, measure the tree, describe the tree, and at the same time, while I'm there, I'm like, look, I'm here at the tree. What are the growing conditions? Are the soils compacted? Is there a lot of soil? Are there ruts? Are there invasive plants there? How much infrastructure is being drilled down into the roots of these trees? And it took me about 5 months, but I looked at over 10,000 locations, and including a public cemetery here a little bit to the east of the city of Auburn. So the red dots represent individual trees in parks or publicly owned open space, and the green represent either planting spaces or street trees. The state requires that we use an online program called iTree. You should check it out. It's also another very useful data modeling software that is supported by not only the New York State DEC, but the Forest Service, and is now being deployed globally. It's an international model. And to say nothing of the fact that if you're looking for species lists, because you're going to be going somewhere and you're not used to, you can download the species list from all over the world, which is kind of cool. Because I'm telling you, if you didn't grow up in Southern California, and you're not really up on your dry tropical trees, you might not know what you're looking at when you're out there. So in this grant, I had to use iTree and the software online to model what the species distribution is. And you can see I've got, City of Auburn has nearly 20% in Norway maple, about 13% in Crimson King Norway maples. Sugar maples are about 7%. I've got sugar maples, and I got red maples, a lot of maple in the City of Auburn. Not at all unusual for upstate New York. Just under half. And this is all the ash trees we lost. I have hundreds of pictures of dead ash trees. We have only a few left, maybe 3 dozen left that have to be removed. We even use some of our COVID relief money, because once these things die, they're very dangerous while they're still standing. And this is Rich, our city tree trimmer, working on one of the street trees that summer. And so, one of the wonderful things about working with the artists was it helped me characterize what our urban forest was like. And some of our trees are just fantastic treasures. Like this bur oak at the Willard Chapel, which has a progeny growing just a few hundred yards from it. Or this fantastic sycamore growing along Seymour Street in the City of Auburn. Jennifer called it the tank tree because the VFW has this great big battle tank. I don't know what kind of tank it is. They planted it out there so everybody knows how to get to the VFW. And it is a true American sycamore. It's not a London plane tree. And then we have a group of trees we call street kids. This is a term that Peter came up with. He's the guy who wrote this book in Germany. And it's a wonderful series of essays about his profession as a forester in Germany. And he talks about the trees in the urban environment as street kids, because they have to deal with such hostile growing conditions, and yet we expect so much of them. Street kids are like the ones you see, yeah, they grew up on the street. You're not going to invest in them in terms of their schooling or their nutrition. We'll sick the courts after them, and the cops and all this kind of stuff, but we're not going to treat them like trees, or people. And unfortunately, that's where our Norway maples come in. And these Norway maples are in really tough shape. So here's our trouble. We lost 1,200 trees from the emerald ash borer. We have another 1,500 trees that are going to be coming down over the next 10 years because they are just not healthy. And our Norway maples are in rough shape. They don't do well without a really nice soil resource. That's even more true for sugar maples, but even Norways are pretty fragile in that regard. And then trespassers. These are the invasive plants that cause problems. Yes, an exotic plant can be invasive, but sometimes exotic plants are really not a problem. Our biggest invasive plant right now that threatens us and the sustainability of our forest is Ailanthus. Ailanthus is from Southern Asia. The tree of heaven is a very aggressive colonizer, and it has some very interesting survival strategies that force us to adopt management strategies that are unfamiliar to us in these latitudes where most of our forestry staff and expectations were found. And here's one of the Ailanthus we have in the City of Auburn. They're coming on real strong. Norway maples are, of course, an official invasive plant in New York State. We also have a ton of Japanese knotweed. We have a ton of multiflora rose, European buckthorn, pale swallowwort too. I don't want to disappoint you.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear about swallowwort.
And here you got a small city, you don't have enough staff. I get phone calls because I had a garden crew working for a city crew. They refused because they refused to enter a site because they said that's giant hogweed. So they called me to go down and say, is it hogweed? It wasn't, but, you know, this takes a lot of experience. So get your botany, right? Get your math, get your GIS, take a summer class, learn some coding. You will be employable. I'm telling you, we are looking for people. And if you're athletic, don't let that be shy. Right? You can make $150 an hour climbing trees if you're a certified arborist. It's the fastest growing employment sector in forestry, is women climbers. Look it up, Women's Tree Climbing Cooperative. They'll get you out there, they'll train you, they'll show you how cool it is. And you say, oh, I'm afraid of heights. You won't be, they'll train you, you'll have confidence. Being afraid of heights is not exactly a dysfunctional reaction. That's a very healthy thing. And now you know you're going to use your ropes and equipment correctly. And then you're going to notice when someone's doing it wrong. You say, okay, I guess I'm not working with that crew. Oh, by the way, this is Rhonda's fantastic painting of white oaks. Because I asked the artist, what tree do you want to do? Why? So, you know, Josh, the street guy, he wanted to do the Norway because it was a street kid. He really dug that whole thing. And Rhonda was, you know, very certain she wanted to do the white oak. Did this wonderful painting. And so what we're focusing on in the future are low growers. We have to grow trees that do not climb up into the wires. We've lost that battle, folks. I think the utilities should do it my way. But the Public Service Commission disagrees, and the utilities have won. Okay, so we spend most of our tree budget on low growers. And then the rest are going to be what we call slow growers. Not fast growers like Norway maples, silver maples. They grow so fast you can turn around and all of a sudden you're like too late to prune it. When you grow slowly, then you can carefully prune it in such a way that it is very compatible with your community's needs and your budget. And check this out on Orchard Street of all places. It's a great neighborhood in the city of Auburn. Oaks on this side, mostly white oaks. And then here's the other side of the street, which are typical Norway type maples. And they are doing great. This could be the future. That's why Dr. Nina Bassick at Cornell, who's recently retired, I don't know what we're going to do. I get to hear from her this weekend. She's speaking at our conference in Syracuse this weekend. She's pioneered new techniques for propagating oaks, thinking that white oaks could be a very important tree species moving forward in the urban environment. So she's created new cultivars and planted some in the city of Auburn. We're cooperating with her. So back on the land surface temperatures. So we use Sophia's algorithm and her JavaScript to do the heat island map. And the heat island simply means that land use influences your summertime and wintertime temperatures on the ground, right? Because certain materials absorb heat at a faster rate than other materials. Blacktop, concrete, bricks, steel, asphalt, that kind of thing that's really, really hot. So in the downtown environment, during the day, temperatures spike. We call that a heat island. And the temperatures are clearly much cooler out here in the rural areas where there is less development. In the inner city, it's deep red, where the temperature's 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Field temperature reading, by the way, in the field with the gizmo, holding your infrared thermometer right up to the land surface, always measures the temperatures higher. So 130, 140 degrees is very easy to find this summer. So you take the data and the imagery that she allows you to export. It's great. I mean, it comes with the world file. It's already geolocated. Boom, pop it into your GIS, and next thing you know, you're off and running. You know where your heat-stressed blocks and neighborhoods are. That's where you can concentrate. Because getting killed from heat is a more common thing in America than dying from frostbite or cold. We lose about 1,000 people. And then this year in Europe, we're talking about places on the planet that will not be livable by humans. Because you can only survive in so hot a place and your sweating body can't keep up. So we want to plant and protect trees in disadvantaged neighborhoods in and adjacent to Auburn's hotspots. So we're going to put a big focus on street and park trees, our downtown and along our arterial. We want to do mini forests because that's where our gold is. So you have backyards where you can really plant your natives. You're gonna plant the white pine, you're gonna plant the big red oaks. You could do the sugar maple where it's cool enough and the soil is deep enough and well drained, those will survive there. Sugars are not doing well on our streets, they just can't take the heat and the grime. This is controversial in some people's mind, the idea of a mini forest. This character, this wonderful biologist, Miyawaki, from Japan, figured out a way to kind of jump over the successional sequence to try to go right to a climax forest. So we started out this summer thinking, well, what can we do with a partnership? How can we use our partnerships at the local level to build on what we now know about our forests? We have partners like the city, the Auburn Beautification Commission, the Public Theater, the school district, Department of Transportation, the DEC, Booker T, all our nonprofits from the Y to the QQ Museum. Don't forget our faith community and the Forest Service. Can we focus on the youth in leadership development? So this summer, several of us put together and ran a week-long conservation camp for middle school kids. The idea is to create middle school level experience doing outdoor stuff that's science-based. They can use it to get credits for a new thing they're doing in New York State called civic readiness. Now students can get a new certification on their diploma if they take sufficient number of credits in civics. I mean, think about a radical notion where people with different opinions could actually be in the same room together. Maybe they could break bread and they wouldn't necessarily say such snotty things to each other on social media or in their Thanksgiving Day celebration. So New York State is putting a flag in the ground and they're trying to move towards civics. Good for them. We would like to help and see if what we tried this summer can be a useful model for them. Here's Beatrice Wilson, Assistant Director for Urban Community Forestry for the United States Forestry Service. The United States Forest Service is a part of the United States Department of Agriculture, and thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, that had more than $1 billion in grants made available for communities. I'm proud to say the City of Auburn has been awarded $945,000 over 5 years to plant trees to address the city's hotspots. Wow, we were just talking about that. And increase tree canopy through partnerships with our West End neighborhoods and city school district. This investment will address limited social and educational opportunities, extreme heat, climate change, and negative environmental impacts of invasive species. Let me tell you, writing a grant, if you've got a mindset that can handle it, that's another career path. Because no matter what field interests you, everybody wants a grant writer. People will be on bended knee at your desk asking for your help. It's a very powerful skill set, of which in this case, I have no bragging rights at all. Okay, that is our capital funding program manager, Christine, and her colleague, Onia, who quarterback all the big grants. That's really worth their staff time. I mean, I bug them for, hey, you want to apply for this $2,500 grant? Why would they apply for a $2,500 grant if it takes as many human hours to do that as a $1 million grant? They have to put their time and talents to work where it's going to make the most difference. So I will part with this photograph of the landscape that Aldo Leopold worked in when he was a young forester in the Southwest. That I actually took myself on one of the many summers I took off. Despite my academic advisor's advice, I went and explored this country. So I appreciate your time and I hope I'm still okay about the clock. Delete that file.
Maybe 2 questions?
Sure.
So I have one for you.
Yeah.
Because you didn't give me this in your bio. What was your academic background to get into this school?
Well, I majored in geology at the University of Rochester, but my actual work was in activism, and I found it difficult to translate my experience as an activist, working on toxics, acid rain, land preservation. It was a lot of valuable experience, but it didn't translate into academic credit. It took me 9 years to get my bachelor's degree. In that time frame, I went to the New York State Forest Technology Program in Wanakina. It's affectionately known as the Ranger School, where I got an associate's degree in applied science, whereupon I joined the United States Peace Corps. While I was in the Peace Corps, because I completed a foreign language requirement for U of R at the time, U of R had a foreign language requirement to graduate. I had all my credits except that. I took the foreign service exam, made the credits, got my bachelor's degree while I was overseas, applied to grad school, came back and got my graduate education, both master's and PhD. First in forest management and then the other in policy and administration from SUNY ESF. I taught community college for a long time and I've been an arborist ever since I stopped doing it.
What would you say for students who want to help contribute? Like, what would you say would be the next step to do?
Well, test yourself. Find out what really gets you excited. You know, what does it for you in terms of a passion? Because if you can know that with a talent that's marketable, you have a recipe for success. So I would never say, oh, be an engineer if you hate math. I mean, if you are good at math, go into engineering. There's 80 grand job waiting for you, maybe 120 grand. You name the engineering field. My kids had that ability. I did not. So they got curiosity from me, but they got their brains from their mother. And they're both engineers. But backing it up a little bit, so for example, the end of the month of October, I believe it's Saturday the 28th, I will double check, we have a community tree planting event in the city of Auburn. Come, enjoy it, give it a try. Yeah, Saturday the 28th. We meet at 8 o'clock at a place called the Auburn Permaculture Park in the city of Auburn. You can email me or text me, I'll get that info to you. Find out if you like it. You'll get a feel for the vibe of the type of people. We volunteer at the State Fair as arborists every year, and both of the new employees I met who work for national arboricultural firms like Davey Tree, a world-leading firm, they were both women. And they were coming out of their college, and they said, hey, I got this job, they offered me this kind of money. What do you think? I said, go for it. Try it for a year or two. While you're doing it, pay off your bloody loans. Buy that next slightly better used piece of crap called a car. If you change your mind, that's cool. The field is huge. We need people who understand data. We need people who understand plans. We need people who are good with people. We need grant writers. We need administrators. Right? We need administrators in urban environments who have imagination as capital funding program managers in public policy, as well as the chops to manage the political challenges of political reality, which means basically allocating scarce resources to a larger ask than you have money for. Some of us are pretty good at that. I'm not really good at it, because I'm not quite as diplomatic as I'm coming across right now. But maybe one of you are. So give it a shot. If you're reserved and introverted, there's places for you in this field. We cannot find people. Get a summer gig on a crew. Suss them out. If you don't trust them, don't trust them. You get word on them and you think it's safe and responsible employer, give it a try for a summer. Next thing you know, you might start thinking about running your own truck, your own firm. There are men and women across this country who are living off-grid on their own places, doing their own form of permaculture, with their own nurseries, plant propagation, and services that they provide to people who need them. Is that sufficiently general to not answer?
Great, well, thank you so much.